The FDA issuing an emergency use order for remdesivir.
We're going to be having some really incredible results.
Showed that patients who took remdesivir improved 31% faster than those taking a placebo. But the full study has not been published, and today's emergency use order is not the same as official approval. Does it improve a patient's chance of surviving COVID-19? And also, does taking remdesivir do any harm?
By Monday, nearly 30 states, home to roughly 150 million people, will start getting back to business in a new normal. This week, nearly 2,000 Americans died every day from complications of the virus.
In Oklahoma City, people waiting outside for stores to open. And in Greenville, South Carolina, a steady stream of shoppers. Simon Property Group, the biggest mall owner in America, is opening 49 outlets and malls across 10 states by Monday.
I'm saying unequivocally, it never happened. And it didn't. It never happened.
Agents from Homeland Security Investigations search a pharmacy tipped off that it was selling masks at vastly inflated prices.
Anger is boiling over in some states. Governors at odds with residents over plans to reopen. What's at stake? The devastating economic toll and the possible loss of even more lives. As risk as crowds skip social distancing today on the National Mall and shopping centers open across the country.
Tonight, across the country, outrage. Protesters demanding states reopen their economies in Maine, Oregon, and Kentucky. 30 arrests as protesters face off with police. While protesters rail at restrictions, elsewhere the virus is rampant and golf courses open. Atlanta's most popular park totally packed.
For a self-described wartime president, victory over COVID-19 equals a vaccine.
I hope we're going to have a vaccine, and we're going to fast-track it like you've never seen before.
Adding Trump-style branding, the administration launched Operation Warp Speed, a multi-billion-dollar research and manufacturing effort to shorten the typical year-plus vaccine development timeline. The goal is ambitious, producing patient-ready vaccines as early as January, though officials stressed there is no guarantee.
We want to go quickly, but we want to make sure it's safe and it's effective. I think that is doable.
Officials tell NBC News the project whittled down 93 potential vaccines from more than 80 pharmaceutical companies. Next, 14 drugs considered most promising will undergo more testing. Narrowed again for clinical trials this month. Officials say the work could result in 3 or 4 vaccines for wide use.
I think probably more than anything I'm in charge, and I'm the one that gets blamed, and I get blamed anyway.
19 states across the U.S. reported outbreaks in their meat processing plants, with nearly 5,000 COVID cases and 20 deaths.
Still to come, the mysterious new illness coronavirus is causing in children. We'll hear from one young girl whose heart stopped because of it.
So far, there have been nearly 100 reported cases in the U.S. and Europe.
This new shock syndrome is really a very small tip of a larger iceberg,
with some children reporting a red rash all over their bodies. Fevers, rash particularly on the back, the chest, or the stomach, red eyes, or abdominal pain.
Going into this weekend, this country saw the highest daily death toll yet, with death rates increasing in places outside the New York area.
Open up our state!
I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
Giving theories new oxygen. The president was pressed to explain what evidence ties the outbreak to the Chinese lab, but held back.
I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
COVID-19 virus was not man-made or genetically modified, so not considered a biological weapon. But officials say they need more proof to determine if the outbreak began through contact with infected animals at China's wet markets, an accident at the Wuhan lab, or another unproven theory. Was this an intentional act?
I don't have anything to say about that.
It's airborne. It'll magically go away in April.
But the administration is not in a joking mood.
President Trump is very clear. We're going to hold those responsible accountable, and we'll do so on a timeline that is our own.
The number of deaths that are accruing on a daily basis tell you what was happening maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago in terms of new infections. So we're going to see deaths continue to rise even as the epidemic starts to peak and decline.
Tonight, the staggering new projections. COVID-19 deaths in America could skyrocket to 3,000 people a day by June 1st, nearly double the number dying right now. A draft government report reveals as more states begin reopening while in other places stay-at-home tensions erupt.
Warning of the possible consequences, predicting by June 1st the daily death toll from the coronavirus could nearly double to 3,000, and the number of cases could jump to 200,000 a day.
Look, we're going to lose anywhere from 75, 80 to 100,000 people. That's a horrible thing. We shouldn't lose one person over this.
And tonight, another model often cited by the White House is projecting the death toll will reach 134,000. That would mean as many Americans could lose their lives in the months ahead as have died so far.
Police are also looking for this man who wiped his nose on a clerk's shirt when asked why he wasn't wearing a face covering.
Don't make us treat you like a criminal. But if you act like a criminal and you violate the law and you refuse to do what is necessary to save lives in this city in the middle of a pandemic, we will take you to jail, period.
We're probably going to get viewed as not doing what we should by getting out, but we're going to do it anyway.
But open malls do not mean open stores. At these two shopping centers near Atlanta, only a handful of stores were open.
With more and more empty shelves, Kroger now says it will limit ground beef and poultry purchases in some of its stores, and Costco is restricting fresh beef, pork, and poultry items to 3 per customer.
It's kind of hard to have social distance and you work side by side.
By next Monday, Frontier, American, Alaska, and Southwest will also require masks. Some airlines will provide them to those who don't have them. If passengers refuse, they could be denied boarding.
So far, the FDA has only granted emergency authorization to 12 antibody tests. The makers of the rest will have to apply within 10 days, showing their positive readings are 90% accurate and negative readings 95%.
Italy was hard hit by COVID with around 1,000 deaths a day. Now deaths are down up to 75% on some days. But Italy is opening cautiously.
In the urgent push to beat back a deadly pathogen, researchers at NYU have now started clinical trials on a never-before-tried genetic vaccine candidate developed by Pfizer along with a German partner. Rather than trying to manipulate the live virus itself, this vaccine attempts to reprogram the virus's genetic code.
A burning question.
Where's the beef?
The fast food giant is the latest company hit hard by the pandemic because of its reliance on fresh beef.
2 new studies out of China and Germany now suggest children can spread the virus. And when schools are open, they can have 3 times the number of contacts as adults.
According to a new poll, 78% of Americans say they're uncomfortable going out to eat, while 56% say they are comfortable going to the grocery store. Most believe gyms, theaters, and barbershops should not yet be allowed to reopen. The news comes as New York officials now report 1,700 previously undisclosed COVID deaths at nursing homes in the state. Meanwhile, in New York City, the mayor says don't expect a complete reopening until September.
In New York City, the numbers keep getting better. But look at what happened when the New York Times analyzed new cases in the rest of the country. It's a very different story. And there is the new chilling projection from the University of Washington. Last month, researchers there predicted just over 60,000 COVID-19 deaths nationwide by August. Now they predict it could be more than double that.
And that form is safety and opening.
The decision announced even as the death toll climbs past 70,000 and new projections disputed by the president show easing social distancing could lead to tens of thousands of additional lives lost.
Time after time, I was pressured to ignore or dismiss expert and scientific recommendations, and instead to award lucrative contracts based on political connections. In other words, I was pressured to let politics and cronyism drive decisions.
Saying Bright's urgent warnings about the need to act starting in early January were met with indifference and later hostility from HHS leaders.
Chinese state media released this cartoon lampooning U.S. accusations as inconsistent and ridiculous. A Communist Party newspaper calling Secretary of State Mike Pompeo a liar over this accusation.
There is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
What happened should never, ever have happened. China should have informed us that they had a problem.
Early on, he praised China.
China seems to be making tremendous progress.
And a new report from the Department of Homeland Security assesses China intentionally concealed the severity of COVID-19 from the international community in early January, while it stockpiled medical supplies.
Called pediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome, believed to be a response to COVID-19. The rare complication marked by fever, red eyes, rash, or upset stomach, and in some cases, cardiac arrest.
Is creating a deep divide. After the highest single-day death toll in Illinois, stay-at-home orders remain in effect. But in East Peoria, the mayor is urging businesses to ignore the governor's orders. Some 10,000 Americans died from coronavirus complications every 5 days over the last month.
It's not a supply problem. There's plenty of live animals. It's a supply chain problem. So we can't get those animals to market to be able to be consumed.
Outrage spilling over on social media. One customer saying not letting your employees wear masks during a global pandemic is insane.
Trying to crack the coronavirus code is now the top priority at Fort Detrick, Maryland, in the Homeland Security Biodefense Center. If the virus can remain airborne, it could potentially spread more easily through hospitals, prisons, meatpacking operations, schools, and nursing homes.
We're most concerned about the really small droplets that you can't see, because those are the ones that get down deep into your lung. And for most infectious agents, that's when you get the worst possible infection.
The pathogen does not survive well in direct sunlight and at certain humidity levels.
Dr. Storti showed me how COVID inflames the lungs, so there's no room for air.
Did this person survive? No.
Coronavirus has found its way into President Trump's circle. A White House military valet whose job included serving the president meals has tested positive for the virus.
I've had very little personal contact with this gentleman. Know who he is, good person, but I've had very little contact. Mike has had very little contact with him.
President Trump saying he and Vice President Pence were tested yesterday and today. The results negative.
Did it spook you? I mean, it can be scary.
Yeah, it's a little bit strange, but it's one of those things.
A person close to the White House says President Trump was, quote, lava-level mad at his staff when he learned the valet tested positive, saying everyone in close proximity to the president should be wearing a mask. And while a White House official says the valets do not wear masks, the president said otherwise.
Your personal valet was wearing a mask in your interaction with him?
They do. They wear masks, yeah. A lot of people in the White House wear masks.
Saying guidance in rural Tennessee should not be the same guidance for urban New York City.
As the death toll in New York tops 20,000. New data shows 66% of recent COVID-19 hospital admissions are from residents who say they had been staying home.
Today in Waterloo, Iowa, Tyson Foods partially reopened its largest pork plant in the country with new social distancing measures, mandatory face masks, and temperature checks.
33.5 million Americans have gotten through filing for unemployment in the last 7 weeks. In 2009, during the worst month of the recession, the U.S. lost about 800,000 jobs. Now, since the stay-at-home orders began, every week between 3 and 6.9 million jobs were lost.
The number of deaths still climbing at over 1,000 a day, now to over 78,000. Also, the April unemployment report was released, and it was a gut punch. 20 million jobs gone. Now tonight, the president confirming a second White House insider has been diagnosed with coronavirus.
So caution to all people who, again, may have believed that their child couldn't be affected by COVID.
New York is now reporting 73 cases of what is being called pediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome. NBC News has found at least 8 other states and Washington, D.C. have also seen the rare complication.
Pence's press secretary, Katie Miller, who's married to the president's top advisor, Stephen Miller, testing positive for the virus this morning after testing negative just yesterday. A White House official tells NBC News Miller was at the White House this morning and showed symptoms. President Trump today publicly revealing the news.
She's a wonderful young woman. Katie, she tested very good for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden today she tested positive. She hasn't come into contact with me. She spent some time with the vice president.
Earlier today, President Trump visited with veterans, all older than 95, at the World War II Memorial. The president chose not to wear a mask, saying he stayed far away from them, and was later asked why White House staff are not wearing masks either.
Well, they are. People that are serving me are.
We have not seen anyone wear a mask around you, sir.
What we see now may underestimate reality. The Labor Department saying the real unemployment rate could be almost 5% higher than reported.
After becoming the first state to reopen 2 weeks ago, Georgia has now seen a 40% increase in coronavirus cases. While infections in Iowa continue to climb, today the governor lifted most state restrictions, opening malls, campgrounds, and this Tyson plant, its largest pork center in the country, where more than 1,000 employees tested positive for the virus.
Today we learned that at least 3 children have died from what doctors call a disturbing syndrome linked to coronavirus and marked by heart failure and high fever.
One of the few rays of good news was young people weren't affected. We're not so sure that that is the fact anymore.
The new jobs report shows unemployment at an historic 14.7%, and it's hitting communities of color particularly hard. For African Americans, that number is 16.7%. No one is suffering more than the Hispanic community. Nearly 1 in 5 Latinos is out of work.
By Friday, most states will have partially reopened. Meanwhile, in Washington state, protesters swarmed the Capitol.
I'm Dasha Burns in Olympia, Washington, where hundreds of protesters called on Governor Inslee to end the stay-at-home order. The majority of this crowd not wearing masks, not social distancing, and not very concerned about the spread of COVID-19.
It has been an absolute chaotic disaster.
That scorching assessment came during a Friday night phone conference with about 3,000 members of the Obama Alumni Association to encourage them to get active helping Joe Biden's candidacy.
Being selfish, being tribal, being divided, it's part of the reason why the response to this global crisis has been so anemic and spotty.
Tonight, the White House responded. There has been bipartisan recognition of President Trump's leadership, and the American people have taken notice.
Dr. Stefano Fagioli told me they had nearly 100 COVID admissions a day a few weeks ago, many critical.
How many COVID admissions are you getting now?
1, 2 a day.
Outside. Don't touch me! Outside. That's the second time you've touched me. We live in America where if you have a note to not wear a mask.
He has a doctor's note exempting him from wearing a mask due to panic attacks. In Alabama, an off-duty officer was seen body slamming a woman at a Walmart when she allegedly refused to wear a mask.
Coronavirus inside the White House. 2 positive cases among the staff, and tonight a new effort to stop more infection. 3 medical leaders behind the federal response following the science into quarantine.
Where these photos of armed protesters at a Subway restaurant quickly went viral.
And come late summer, early fall, we could have a peak that could make everything else that we've done so far look mild.
South Korea's president is warning of a potential second wave of infections.
New type of coronavirus test that detects fragments of virus proteins or antigens.
Done in a few minutes, 15 minutes usually.
Much faster than what's currently used to diagnose COVID.
Austria's population is roughly the same as New York City's, but it's reported only around 600 coronavirus deaths, not 20,000.